Hi, Andrea. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stage is yours.
And we even have the slides. Hello, everyone, and thank you, Tavi. It's the first time when someone said correctly my name at the conference. I've been all sorts of things, but not Andreea Munteanu so far. Thanks for that. I'm Andrea. I'm MLOps Product Manager at Canonical, and my first question is, how many of you have heard of Canonical? 1, 2, 3, okay. How many of you have heard of Ubuntu? There we go, there we go. Well, Canonical is the publisher behind Ubuntu. And that's where I work. I got introduced to Ubuntu in uni because of a machine learning project. And you might say, hey, but this has nothing to do with machine learning, even worse with MLOps. But the truth is that in Canonical, we promise to offer secure open source at all layers of the stack, from bare metal all the way up to apps such as Kubeflow or MLflow, where I'm focusing on. So this is also, I'm glad to be able to say that, because I'm one of those people from 72 countries. We hire everyone, so if you're looking for a job in any of the layers of the stack, we are happy to have you. And they don't pay me to say this. This is also something that I stole from NVIDIA a couple of years ago. Their CEO said, hey, AI is eating the word. The truth is that it has use cases in all sorts of industries. We have customers. These are some of the use cases that we have, actually. I started on machine learning in retail in Romania a couple of years ago. I wish I could see my old manager. And we were doing market basket analysis back then. But nowadays, a lot of the public sector organizations, especially in the US, are using machine learning to improve the safety of the cities. For example, one of the customers is using open source tooling, actually, to automatically alert whenever they detect any illegal activity. So if there is a shooting, the authorities are automatically informed in one of the cities. And that's just one example. Card fraud detection or credit risk analysis are just some of the very classical use cases. And whereas it's cool and it's nice, it's still challenging. There's a skill gap on the market. We struggle, and in general, companies struggle finding talent that can do machine learning, data science, and probably that's something that we see. But then also, in many industries, there is a need for a culture change. I remember we were in an automotive company in Germany, and we said, hey, there is this cool project. You can do it. It's all good. They paid us to understand the use cases that they could benefit from. And the manager said, yeah, but it's going to take my job. I don't want that. And it's still happening. That's the truth. But then if we move towards operations, most of the tooling and the solutions, some of my colleagues earlier, actually yesterday, presented them. They do require high maintenance, but also security. How do you ensure that finance data is not accessed by all data scientists from the company is one of the questions that we get asked quite often. But then also the technology. Okay, everyone is using ChatGPT, but also there are tons of tools on the market. Every other day you read there's a new framework, there's a new tool, and as a customer or as a company you say, what should I use? What's the right tool for me? And last but not least, data. On one hand, there are many data sources. When I started, it was probably 10 years ago, there was a huge push on computer vision, but that was it. Nowadays, everyone uses any other data source, and there is still, I think, not enough education on the market, but also the data volume is increasing. So you might wonder, okay, you still don't tell us why AI on Ubuntu. Over 80% of data scientists use Ubuntu for their machine learning. That's something that the Stack Overflow report said a couple of years ago. And that's what inspired us to get started and inspired us to invest more in machine learning. Big companies such as Netflix or Tesla use Ubuntu for their machine learning. NVIDIA's hardware runs on Ubuntu. All those cool GPUs, all the DGX, it all runs on Ubuntu. And further, we actually validate it. But I'm not going to do a sales pitch. And when it comes to what you can do almost anything, from building a smart city just using Ubuntu to do computer vision the way that I did a couple of years ago. It's all there. But now I'll start actually on why I'm here and talk about predictive analytics, and that's a lobster. I already said we hired internationally, and a couple of years ago, I had an interview with someone from Thailand. We were hiring for our team. It was about machine learning, so I said, hey, what's your use case? Tell me a cool project that you worked on. It's one typical question that we have. So he said that he never worked in a company, but he did his own project, and his family has a lobster farm. I don't know how much you know about it. Lobsters are grown in some big buckets. And he was complaining about, actually his family was complaining about how difficult it was to monitor all these buckets, because the more you have, the more time you have to spend to walk between all of them. So the student back then, he was only 18 when he did that, he put cameras above all the buckets to monitor them. And then with the recorded data, he built a model to actually, on one hand, alert automatically his family when there is a problem with the lobster, when there are too many in the bucket. So his family stopped walking between buckets. But also then he started doing predictions on what's the average time that the lobster stays in a bucket, when they should start considering moving them from smaller buckets to bigger buckets. And that was the first use case of predictive analytics that he did. So what's predictive analytics? Are we familiar with it? Yes, no? You can raise your hand. I know, Google Cloud knows it. So predictive analytics is a branch of advanced analytics, actually. It uses historical data to detect future outcomes or future performances. It's a branch that has been around for a very long time, actually. But with the growth of data volumes, it became more popular, and it is more needed. It's being more approached by companies. It's also one of the typical projects that can run in production, because when it comes to machine learning, often organizations feel that they never move beyond experimentation, so they don't get any return on investment from their projects. It's not the case with predictive analytics. These are some of the methods that you can use. Regression is a typical one, as well as clustering. Oh, I don't have clustering here, actually. I have classification, it's almost the same thing. These are some of the methods. Decision trees are the very typical one. It helps us identify the path to get to a lead, for example. And this is the workflow. I always encourage our customers, you should not invest in AI if you don't have a problem. Don't have a problem? You don't know your use case? Don't do it for the sake of doing it, just to be the cool company that does AI. And that's something that I would encourage everyone. Whereas I know it's nice, I know everyone talks about it, everyone says, hey, you can use generative AI to whatever. Don't do that. You're going to waste money and resources. You would rather spend a bit more time on identifying the use cases. I am a big believer that every company could benefit from AI, but if you don't know the use case, you won't be very happy on the result. So it's not there, but first you should have a use case. And then when it comes to the workflow, the very next step is data. It's the heart of any machine learning project, including predictive analytics project. So please ensure you have data and identify how you can access it. There are some examples of data. Databases are the classical ones: images, videos, sensor data. It also depends on your use case. And then you start processing the data. I think yesterday, during the talk on Freshful, you learned a lot more about how you can pre-process the data, how to clean it, what are the challenges when it comes to that. For me, as an old data scientist, I'll say that this is the worst part. I hate pre-processing data. I don't think anyone likes cleaning duplicates and identifying nulls and so on. And then you start developing predicting models. You use the methods that I mentioned before. And this is the fun part, usually. You build a model, you optimize the model, you try different methods to do that. And then you start integrating it within your systems. If it's a video camera, you integrate the model on the video camera and think on how actually it can alert it. There are a couple of things to mention, of course. On one hand, you should never think of this as a linear process, as it is here, actually. And as it is often shown, it's an iterative process. You do it once, you start getting benefits out of it, but we should always think of the monitoring part of it. How do you do model monitoring? How do you do data drift monitoring? Because behavior changes, trends change, and based on it, we should always retrain our model, redeploy our model, and so on. Otherwise, it makes no sense. In 3 months from now, you'll say, hey, machine learning is not working. It doesn't give me good results anymore. It's not good of anything. We should not invest in it. No, it does. But the truth is that we should also be cautious on how do we do it and ensure that we set a complete pipeline and we bear in mind the maintenance of it. Like any other IT system that we have out there, this one as well has actually or has a need for being maintained, for being retrained, for being monitored. Why do we use predictive analytics? I'm a product manager. I like numbers more than I like just to write code at this point in my life, at least. As I already mentioned, it has been here for a very long time. The market is evaluated in the US only at 14 billions, and it's expected to grow tremendously in the next 4 years. And of course, you might say, hey, all the reports state that, and that's true. Everyone expects AI as a market to grow, and predictive analytics makes no exception. The only cool thing or better thing is that because it has been here for a long time, there are more people with expertise, and also because it uses a lot of statistics, the likelihood to find experts in the domain is bigger than to find some expert in Gen AI that appeared, I don't know, 6 months ago. What are the benefits? It makes us, or it helps us be more predictable. From reducing costs, because you know when you need to do maintenance in an automotive company, and you have to bear in mind that for every minute when an automotive company is closed, they lose up to $25,000. So knowing when they should do maintenance on any of their machines is very important. To actually reducing costs of accidents, predictive analytics helps us on many fronts. These are just some of them. Gaining competitive advantage, I don't think is the most important one. But at the same time, I do know that often companies invest in AI to gain competitive advantage or for sustainable reasons, which is not here, actually. Who uses it? I'm tempted to say everyone. I already gave some anecdotes from our customers or from what I've been working on. Churn prevention or credit risk analysis, again, are some of the very typical use cases. But if you think of Uber or Glovo, they do a lot of predictive analytics. And if you end up accessing their systems, it's impressive how well they can predict our behavior based on historical data. It's similar to retailers. And here I'm really thinking of brick and mortar stores. Based on how we buy, I'm afraid to say, but they know everything. When they should have more people in the store because there are more people buying, when they should stock more with bread, and when should they stock more with beer. These are the kind of behaviors that they can actually identify using historical data, using some statistical models. And I have some more use cases, actually. These are use cases that we've seen and we've been working on. In the media and entertainment, it's actually a company from Romania. I was very surprised. Their headquarters is in the US, and I joined the meeting. I saw a Romanian name, and I was like, oh, do you speak Romanian? Long story short, they have a high attrition on streaming platforms. If you think of, I don't know, Netflix? No, I'll say Spotify this time. If you think of Spotify, well, should I use Spotify or Apple Music or Deezer, or there are probably other 100 of options out there. And customers often move from one to other because of different reasons. Recommendations are not good, quality of sound is not good. And here we really focus on how you can actually offer a better experience. Usually they use predictive analytics to understand customer behavior, similarly to what I described on the retail industry. And for us as users, it means improved content recommendation. I can easily suggest the Discover Weekly on Spotify. I'm using Spotify because that's what I use. Of course, probably Deezer has the same, I don't know. But if we go back to how it helps also the company behind it, it actually gives them insight on how and what's getting more traction. It gives them insight on when people are more active and also how they should, for example, provision their servers in order to efficientize their costs. And this may be not something very obvious, but you have to bear in mind that a lot of the governments actually are now sanctioning companies for consuming too much power and too much electricity. Route planning for airplanes. When this company came to us, we said that they were crazy. I ended up trying them out. It's a company from Africa. And they did it really for cost reasons. Often they were flying empty flights because flights there are very expensive. And they said, hey, is there an option to optimize our routes depending on where our customer goes and also where do we have a need? I was the skeptical one. I said, yes, you can, but does it make sense? We'll fly with that. A year later, I was on that flight. But then my colleague said, yes, it's cool. And you have to bear in mind that 2% of the CO2, it comes from flights. Flights are really polluting, and nowadays they're full with people, at least in Europe, from what I've seen. But the truth is that if you remember the pandemic times, there were all these flights with empty people, with no people, sorry. There were like 2 people in the entire flight. That's not very efficient for the environment, but also for the company. So they built models to predict how people are flying, and based on it, they have kind of hop-in, hop-out flights throughout whole Africa. They reduce flight emissions. That's what we care about as people. What they care about, actually, is that they reduced costs. And also, they reduced the maintenance costs because they fly less. They have plenty of data to use that and to analyze it. On one hand, they have passenger data, population data as well. And last but not least, the aircraft data, how much fuel they burn. Based on it, they actually might even change the aircraft itself, a smaller one, a bigger one. I found it quite interesting, and it actually works. Without knowing that, I was at an event in Africa, and 2 people were telling me how cool that is, that now they can actually fly safely, their flights don't get cancelled anymore, and they even help the environment. I was like, oh, that's nice. Market basket analysis, that's an old use case. It's really, in retail, I described it a bit. Shortly, the purpose of it was to generate more sales, and it was initially designed to improve the promotion plans of retailers. How do you mix the items in a store in order to better understand them? Back then, I've learned that diapers are very well sold with beer. I'm not sure if that should be a good promotion, but actually it also grows the company revenue. If you put things together in a wisely manner, people buy more, and then if they buy more, the stores have more sales. That's what they care about more than anything. And also to sell things that are about to expire, for example, so the waste is much lower. For that, they often use sales data as well as information about the items as well. I'm going to simplify it. How does it help us as people, not as developers, not as machine learning engineers? And it's less pollution. And I think Romania is lucky here. There is quite clean, it's nice. But in other countries, in China, you don't see from here to the door, and that's the problem. That's where pollution really makes a difference, and thinking on how to reduce it is important. At the same time, a telco company from the UK uses 3% of the total energy consumed in the country for every year. So the government said, oh well, you have to change that, you have to reduce it. So that's when they invested in predictive analytics and in AI in general to reduce that and to start having their towers on and off depending on the crowds. And that's really based on data, historical data, on how people move, how much usage they get, and so on. It improves our quality of life. I think we all enjoy getting nice recommendations on different platforms. We all enjoy using online shopping nowadays. I think the ladies more than the gentlemen, of course. But I think it helps us, and we tend to take it for granted. But once you realize or you get rid of it for a couple of weeks or months, you start missing it. It gives us predictable costs. You can be a bit of a nerd, build your own machine learning model, see how much you're likely to spend, depending on the month, day of the week, I don't know. I do that. It's fun. I have them all in a dashboard, in a Google Data Studio. It's free for everyone. It gives us also faster time to fix problems. Again, if you think of your own car, you can really easily predict when it's going to need maintenance, except for the very typical, like, by law activities. But then it also can reduce operations in your team, especially if you're a manager. And no employee likes doing repetitive tasks. No employee likes doing things that feel redundant. So thinking on how to automate them or how to make them almost disappear will help our teams feel better. And if they're better, they're more likely to stay in the company. If they stay longer in the company, well, probably productivity grows as well. Safety, again, I don't think Romania has big problems on that, or I'm biased again. I don't really live here. But in many places of the world, that's a problem. And feeling more safe in the place where you live, it's important. I have colleagues that move from one side of the world to the other because they said, hey, it's dangerous here. I don't want to live here. And the police never comes. So having cameras that automatically alert the authorities, for example, it's something that really makes a difference. What's the open source role? Probably in Canonical, we have open source in our DNA. And I was not that brainwashed when I joined them. I was not really sold on open source. By now, I can confirm I am. I think open source should be everywhere. We should all use it. And why does it matter? Well, it's available to everyone. You can try it out easily. It doesn't cost you anything. It's, I think, free. I'm not going to say that it's easy to use always, because it depends on the project, on the documentation, on the community that's behind. But it's also easy to add features. If you want something that's really not out there, and you're really passionate about writing code, there's nothing to stop you. Write the code, contribute to the community, contribute to the upstream project, you'll get it back, and even more, everyone is going to get it. So you're going to make a lot of people happy around you, because it's very likely that you're not the only one who has that problem. Again, it's free to use it, and I like it. Everyone likes free things. And here are all the open, not all, here are some of the open source projects that you can easily use for free in your predictive analytics, or in general in your AI project. You have databases, Postgres, MySQL, OpenSearch, or MongoDB are just some of the examples on the data side. But then when it comes to building models or tracking experiments, you can always use Kubeflow, MLflow, DVC for data version control, Feast for feature store. These are just some of the other examples, but you can also deploy models. NVIDIA Triton, Seldon are just two of the other examples, Kserve. And it's very interesting because I think the industry is moving more towards open source. There are countries, for example, in the Middle East, they have an open source KPI. They cannot implement a new solution if a certain % of the solution is open source. That's one example. Then NVIDIA on its own, they open source a lot lately. And actually, they're kind of switching gears towards open sourcing more, because they've noticed that that's what gets traction on the market. And then when it comes to the life cycle, you should experiment on Ubuntu. If you're not an Ubuntu fan, of course, you can use any other operating system. If you use a Mac, of course, there are other alternatives. For example, you can use Multipass, which is quite nice. It comes from Canonical as well. And it's open source. Everything is open source with us. Then when you want to build more reliable or repeatable project, you might consider a bit more advanced tooling, such as MLflow, that goes well with Jupyter Notebooks or with Kubeflow. Kubeflow on its own is really a project that is designed to run AI at scale. So if you try it out and it doesn't work on your laptop, don't get too angry on it. It's normal. It's a really heavy project. And then you can run AI on the edge. You can deploy models with different tools. I have here as an example Triton. So how do we get started with predictive analytics? I already mentioned, you start with a use case. Don't start just because, I don't know, you heard me saying on stage, hey, predictive analytics has been here for a long time. Nope, doesn't work. I mean, it works, but you won't be happy. Then look at your data. First of all, do you have data? If the answer is no, drop it. Find another use case. Maybe your company has a lot of images rather than text, and it will help you more to do some other use case. Then identify the stack that suits you the best. I don't think that all tools are good for everything. If I use PyTorch, you should not use necessarily PyTorch. Maybe you want to use TensorFlow. And if I use Nemo Megatron, because I know I'm doing Gen AI on medical data, it doesn't mean that you should use it as well. Look at the things that suit you the best, and look at tools that cover your needs. If they're open source, it's even better. And then you should start building your model. Before you do that, of course, you have to clean your data to do all the pre-processing part. Building the model on its own, I think it's fun. And then you deploy the model. If you do a project that just ends up at the build the model part, I think it's not a successful one, even if you had a lot of fun as an engineer or as a data scientist. Because the idea of machine learning and the idea of predictive analytics is to get some return on investment. If you stop at experimentation, it's great. Probably you learned a lot, but we should think of how do we actually get benefits out of it. Get started with open source, of course. On Ubuntu laptop, we have certified laptops from Dell. And then you can always use tools such as Jupyter Notebooks and MLflow. These are the two things that I think it's the easiest to start with. Are we familiar with MLflow? I have one person here. OK. We have some people. MLflow, it's a project that it's fully open source. It has 4 main components. I think its core is really related to experiment tracking. You integrate it with different tools, such as Jupyter Notebook, and then you can record your experiments that you run in the notebooks, and you query them. It has a couple of other capabilities, such as model registry, which is, again, very powerful. Sorry. Because you can store your models, you can manage your models easier. And if I go back to how many times do you experiment when you build your model? Many times. You won't be successful from your first trial. Don't be that optimistic. And even if you take, a project from the internet, if you change the data set on your use case, it's likely that you will need to adjust the model. And again, you have to do or to build more than one model. Furthermore, if you deploy it in production and you think of the retraining part, again, you will have more than one model on its own. Then you have to scale your project. And I think that's where the difficult part is. That's where many people, many companies as well, give up because they say, hey, there is no tool available out there. How do I scale my project? Going on SageMaker is very expensive. But then also building or buying GPUs, again, is very expensive. Which is true to a certain extent, but there are alternatives and there are optimization manners. Scaling your project needs, or it gives us faster time to market as a company. And then, I already mentioned the idea that, hey, public clouds are expensive, but then what if you start on a public cloud to experiment, and then you move towards a hybrid cloud scenario, or maybe a multi-cloud scenario because your company grew by buying other companies and your data is all over the place? It's fine. You want freedom of choice. Nowadays, organizations really run away from a vendor lock-in. Whereas it is comfortable, then it makes them very dependent on their costs. So they are afraid of that as well. I do recommend open source for that. For bridging the skill gap, that's challenging. You won't get more skilled people in the next year, even if universities invest more. There are more program studies for data science, for machine learning engineer, for whatever. At the moment, I think using tools that are well integrated so you don't try to juggle with them on your own. And then identifying options to automate part of your use cases. Do automated deployments. Ensure you use tools that can be easily upgraded. Look for tools that have a good documentation as well. Look for communities out there. The truth is that if you ask on the right channels, you get answers in less than 5 minutes. And then security and compliance. I think yesterday, Fresh Food, again, was mentioning about security vulnerabilities. And also often industries such as healthcare, financial services, public sector, they have a lot of compliance requirements. So that's when you can think of a distributor, of a company that distributes all the tools. such that they do security patching, they do bug fixes, they scan daily your tools, and you get the latest version that is safe for you to use. Because you don't want your data to be out there on the internet and everyone to see it. You don't want to get your data poisoned either. So you can actually you can get started with some of the tools, and then you can scale your projects with open source. I don't think it's a very popular option in Romania, but actually in other markets, it's obvious. We have one customer in the Middle East. They build their entire stack from the cloud environment where they use OpenStack all the way up to applications for AI to digitalize the entire country using open source. I think they have 80% of what you see here. And actually, yes, you can scale your projects with open source. You can use Kubeflow for deployment, Grafana and Prometheus for monitoring of the infrastructure, Seldon for model deployment, as well as model monitoring. And this is just an example of a stack that I can tell from the top of my mind. But again, it depends on your use case. What are you doing as a company? What are the requirements that you have as well? Usually when you scale your project, this is what you look for: security, compliance, and enterprise support. If your stack crashes, it's very comfortable to know you have someone to actually ask for help, and that has clear SLAs, so they will not answer in the next 2 weeks. At the same time, going back to the skill gap on the market, often companies or distributors offer managed services. You don't have to worry about the stack on its own, but rather on building models, taking them to production, learning how to get benefits from machine learning or from predictive analytics. Are we familiar with MLOps? OK, I see a couple of people. I always define it shortly as DevOps, but for machine learning. I think DevOps is much more popular. It has usually 2 parts: the machine learning part, where you build your model, you get your data, all the cool things that people are very familiar with. And then the ops part, where it's really to monitor your model, to configure the environment, to package the model, for example, and so on. It is a loop because, as I mentioned, it's not a one-time process. You have to always repeat it. You have to always look at it, because otherwise it will be outdated quite quickly, depending on the use case, depending on the industry, and so on. Are we familiar with Kubeflow? So Kubeflow, my colleague is familiar. He likes AI, I can tell. Kubeflow is a project that was started by Google a couple of years ago. And it's an MLOps platform. It's designed to run the entire machine learning lifecycle within it. It's really a suite of products. Kubeflow pipelines are the core of it. You can automate workloads using it. And then with notebooks, you train your model. You can do hyperparameter tuning. You can optimize your models using some of the components. And then you can serve your models if you think of Kserve or Knative. That's now available in the bundle. It's a cloud-native application, runs on any Kubernetes, and then you can run it everywhere. The reason why I mentioned that, hey, if you try it on your laptop and it doesn't work, don't get angry, it's really because it's resource-heavy. The project on its own grew a lot, and it's getting better on running it on small machines. But going back to why and how it has been designed to scale your project, it's really not designed to work on a laptop, but rather to scale your project. So when you have an experiment that you're happy with, that's when you should think of how to migrate it to a tool such as Kubeflow. So to wrap it up, if you want to use open source, you don't want to pay for tooling, it's fine. You can always get started with MLflow with notebooks, for example, and then you can scale with integrated solutions. Think of a couple of things, such as how to reproduce your models, how to manage your models as well. Think if you need enterprise support, if you just do it for fun. You can just use the open source projects. And then consider open source, because I think it's a nice alternative, and especially in the AI world, there is a swap on the market. There are more projects that are open source than that are closed source. And I wanted to leave you actually with a question. What's your lobster project? How could you improve your life by using machine learning? And this is actually, I'm very happy to say, if you want to see also demos of open source, you can join us at one of the events here, and you can listen to our podcast, which is more technical than this presentation because my colleague is a bit more technical. That was it.
Thank you so much. Andreea Munteanu.
No.
Just kidding. Andreea Munteanu, everyone. Before I ask you if there are any questions, maybe someone would like to answer Andrea's question. So, what is your lobster? Is anyone interested in raising a hand? No? Okay. Let's see if we have questions for Andreea from you guys. Just raise a hand and I'll give you a mic. Okay, I'll come there. Just a second.
I can come next year to ask again the lobster question. What's our lobster story?
Hello. No, I don't have anything to say about the lobster project, but I have a question related to the usability of the AI in the not very legal activities. We are talking about the AI in medicine, in improvement, the lifestyle. But how can we forbid the use of AI in the criminality direction?
The truth is that we cannot. Like, that would be the short answer. It's really like any other new invention that appeared on the market. You can use cars to go from point A to point B, or you can use cars to transport illegally drugs. And the truth is that we don't like that. However, as the market grows and as it evolves, there are going to be more regulations, I think. And there are a couple that already appeared, such as the European AI Act, and there is another one in the US, which will give companies more and people as well more guidance on where their project stands. Is it legal or is it not? But if we are being very honest, at the moment there is not a clear way to identify if AI is being used for any illegal activity, and that is a risk, that's true.
Thank you. We have another question there.
Hello, thank you for the presentation. I'm Marius from Gameloft. My question is regarding the ML ops and let's say adaptation of DevOps for ML. How do you see this as from an organizational perspective? Who handles what? What are your experiences from the projects you've worked on?
So I think it really depends on the AI readiness of the enterprises. Often, at the moment, there are companies that invest in a new team that really focuses on ML ops. So you have a head of ML ops or an ML ops engineer that manages the platform. And then you have a data science team or a machine learning team that focuses on building the models. I think in the long run, DevOps and ML ops are going to merge. And then who nowadays focuses only on DevOps, they're going to end up focusing on DevOps and ML ops. And then you'll have teams specialized in building machine learning models, in doing actually the projects. Of course, there is as well a gap in between where you have companies accessing managed services. So, for example, we manage the entire infrastructure, the entire MLOps platform, and then they only have machine learning engineering teams that focus on building models, building projects, and so on.
So you would say that you have like an evolution for the DevOps guys and the infrastructure guys to also handle the infrastructure for machine learning, but then you also have like a specialized department to work with the business on the use cases.
Yes.
And do the, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for the answers, Andrea. Thank you for the presentation. It was very insightful. Thank you for being a great audience and asking questions. Andrea will be around. Yes. So I know there were some more hands raised back there. You can find Andrea here. Big round of applause for her, please.